Want to thank everyone for making it out here today. I think this is a pretty impressive turnout for 3:30 on a work day. Many of you might know Harry and myself, Jonah Bliss. We put on an event in Los Angeles called Curbivore. It's our first time putting on a special new event, the Urban Autonomy Summit. I think it's obviously a very important, significant moment for AVs, robotaxis, self-driving vehicles. They are sort of, after many false starts, finally here. And they're not just here in the broad sense, but they're entering New York City. Obviously, Waymo, top of mind for a lot of people. And so we thought this would be a perfect moment to actually kind of get into what does that mean, what are the implications from a labor perspective, a technology perspective, an urban planning perspective. And I think it's important that they're not just operating, but they're operating in megacities, in New York, in London, in Tokyo. And that's obviously a little bit different than a Waymo roaming the wide streets of Phoenix. So I think we can kind of explore those topics and have some important decisions and discussions, and then also meet the people that are working on building this future together. And yeah, we really appreciate you coming out to talk about this with us. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. You can clap for Jonah. Well said, well said. Definitely this event wouldn't be possible without all of our partners, so just want to give a big thanks to Nexar, Gridwise, L-Charge, Tower Mobility, and Obi. This, as Jonah said, is our first New York City event, and I would say from the turnout so far, I think it's going great. We really appreciate everyone coming out. And I think one of the things that I know always we try to make stand out with our events. I was just joking, it's easy to get a lot of people from insurance or from the fleet industry to a big hotel in Vegas every year. We don't really like doing that. We like making it a lot harder on ourselves. Our Curbivore conference in LA is half outside. We get to deal with the elements, but then we also try to bring together a really interesting mix of people from across the value chain. So we'll have folks at the platforms, the Uber and Lyfts, the companies, the AV companies. We see charging, insurance, right? All of these, fleet owners, all of these different aspects of the value chain. And then I think the other really cool thing is we know AVs and Waymo is buzzy right now, but there are a lot of businesses out there right now where 90 or 75 or 99% of their business is happening today with humans or with vehicles today. And so I want to talk about, a lot of our speakers have real businesses today. There's a lot of hype with AVs. So how are they thinking about that future AVs, building towards that, while at the same time, running really tough, difficult fleet businesses or insurance or whatever it might be. So thank you to our sponsors and thank you to everyone for coming out. We're going to jump into our first panel here. And we're going to talk about fleets and some data and driver earnings, and we'll get into it. And we'll basically, program-wise, it's on the screens, but we're going to have 3 panels, and then definitely everyone feel free to stay 5 to 7. We're going to do a reception kind of right around here on the side. Out there, we'll have some light bites and drinks and whatever else you guys might want. Sound good? All right, panelists.
Thank you, everyone. So we're kicking off our very first panel exactly on the pressing issue of AV's impact on drivers' earnings, existing fleets, and also pricing for consumers. So I have with me today an esteemed panel of experts, starting from my right here, Ryan Green from Gridwise, Ashwini Anburajan from Obi, and we have Daniel Muñoz from Tower Mobility, and Yariel Diaz from Robotics. So I wanted to kick off with rideshare. Waymo is already in 5 cities doing 250K trips every week. And so the impact would be probably most pronounced for drivers in those cities. And Gridwise recently released a report that showed there has been some impact in decline in earnings for some drivers in some cities. So I want to dive into that and explore a little bit about the nuances behind that. So Ryan, would you mind kicking us off? Like, what's the big picture there? Like, what's happening to driver earnings in those cities?
Yeah, of course, and maybe I can help you understand like what where we're coming from in the market, as well as you think about Gridwise, as we're a data and analytics company that's providing that's really focused on empowering the gig mobility workers. We empower over 1 million of these gig mobility workers and helping them maximize their income. But as they work and use our application, connect their accounts to Uber and Lyft, DoorDash, any company they work for, we're capturing billions and billions of trips and deliveries in our system and have a very rich understanding of driver behavior, wages, but also consumer side pricing and pick up and drop off information, et cetera. So we produce a lot of reports like Natalie just mentioned, as well as provide access to a lot of the insights and analytics to many types of companies across different industries. So as we think about like the impact that we're seeing, I think it's everyone assumes that it's like, hey, as soon as AVs roll out into the market, we're going to see an instant decline in driver earnings. We're going to see all the trips going over to AV vehicles, et cetera, which at first wasn't really the case. But now, as we're looking across a lot of the metropolitan areas that have had AVs operating for the course of at least 6 months or more, they're at a bit more scale as it relates to the fleet size. We are seeing a direct impact to earnings, and we're looking at earnings across the pay per trip, hourly earnings, gross take-home earnings that the drivers take home every month as well. And across the board, across all those markets that we're looking at, San Francisco, Austin, Phoenix, LA, there's a decline across them all. So where we're seeing the most impact is actually in LA. So if you look at take-home pay of a driver in LA, we've seen that year over year decline 18%, which is obviously a very major impact. And really why is you look at LA, you look at it across San Francisco, what's interesting is that we've seen San Francisco be a bit more of an anomaly as it relates to gross income or gross take-home pay, is that San Francisco is the only market we see where gross income is actually increased a few percentage points, while hourly pay has gone down, while pay per trip has also gone down. So what do you look at next from there? The other stats that we look at are utilization and liquidity in the marketplace based off of trips per hour and the way we measure that. And those have actually also gone down. So because of that, what we infer is that drivers are actually having to work a lot more, and we see the work hours increasing for those drivers in the San Francisco market, and they're driving a lot more than they used to make more and to compensate for the decrease in pay. But we don't see that same behavior elicited by drivers in the other markets.
I'm curious, are drivers adapting to this sort of new normal for them? Are they, picking sort of longer trips? Like, are longer trips more available to them now that, AVs are sort of introduced as new supply into the market?
Yeah, so as we look at, as an AV, any AV platform, like as they enter into a market, they are optimizing for operating in the most high density demand areas and optimizing for the shortest trips possible, because it's going to keep them as utilized as possible. So what you are seeing in the near term is more displacement of short term or short distance trips that are in those like high density areas, in the urban areas, and human drivers taking a bit more of the longer distance trips, whether that's airport trips, whether that's trips in suburban areas, but also some other urban areas, or in peak demand time, maybe they're taking more of those trips. But that's where we see kind of the impact to utilization, I think, declining as well, because you're seeing the types of trips that the human drivers are continuing to take there's creating longer wait time between those trips. There's that, but plus the market's already been, for the last 2 to 3 years, oversupplied. So now you're adding more supply to the market. I think what a lot of a lot of people across the industry, and I also believe that autonomous vehicles are going to increase the TAM of the market, the total addressable market, and total demand pool available for riders or for any operators to go after. But in the near term, I think there's just going to be some displacement that takes place of rides until you have more broader rollout of these vehicles, larger fleet sizes, but also the price per mile has to start to drop down more drastically from relative to where it's at today.
I want to bring in Daniel for a moment from Tower Mobility. You run a fleet of EVs in LA, as well as like Wayve accessible vehicles in 6 other cities. And you mainly work with Uber, but also now with Waymo to provide accessible vehicles for their service. And so since these AVs have come onto the market, has the fleet dispatches to your drivers changed at all? And like, I'm curious what you're observing there.
No, we have not seen any changes. Actually, we have seen an uptick on EPH. I think that there is a transition from the tactical, what's happening today, to pricing and utilization, to where the AV companies like Waymo are looking at it strategically, which is very similar to the pharma model, which is you look at this as a 10-year net present value with tactics or strategies to gain the market initially by going down in price. But at the end of the day, I will think that they will continue at a price equal to today or higher, because that's where the margins are. From a net present value point of view, from a financial point of view, long term, they need to keep those pricing.
Are your drivers getting more or less jobs, or is it more, is not as
So we have developed our own algorithms to actually go and make sure that they're 100% utilized. So we haven't seen any decrease in utilization of trips per hour throughout the hours that our cars are out there.
And I suppose with the expansion of AV services, you know, the demand for like Wayve vehicles are also, you know, growing as well.
That is correct. So the Wayve business, how we catalog it right now, and how we segment it, what we do today is specifically to serve the requirements of the TNCs in the market in order for them to operate. The other piece of business there that is huge that we have put in the back burner right now is the non-emergency medical transportation, and also the microtransit business that is also Wayve type of business, which is also very large in opportunity.
Yeah, I'll get to the consumer pricing side in a bit, but I do want to touch on delivery before we move on. Serve Robotics is currently in 5 cities with Uber, working alongside human couriers. So I'm curious what you see the role of robots there. Like, is it taking a particular type of trips more than humans?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So if you don't know us, Serve Robotics, we do sidewalk delivery robots. We're in LA, Miami, Atlanta, Dallas, and now Chicago as of last week. So we are expanding pretty quickly. We just launched our 1,000th robot, and we are going to have 2,000 by the end of the year. So we're growing pretty quickly. And that's, as you mentioned, Natalie, a partnership with Uber Eats. So we are only really picking up that last mile, that 1 to 1.5 mile delivery, and we only deliver right at the sidewalk. So what does that mean? As a delivery driver, you're still getting orders that are leaving it right at the door of the customer. You're still getting orders that are meet in the lobby. You're still getting orders that are beyond that 1 mile, 1.5 mile radius. So we're not necessarily displacing delivery drivers. I would say we are complementing those rides that in reality, they don't necessarily want, because that last mile is usually the one that you get the worst tips on. These are the rides that you almost never get folks accepting, because it's based on, the algorithm usually pays out based on distance, and that distance is very narrow. And on the customer side, sometimes I'll tell you, it's happened to me where I order something from down the block and I'm like, do I really need to tip this person 20% to go 3 blocks to deliver my cookies? You know, you think about it. And with the robot, you don't have to think about it because you don't tip.
So yeah, like after covering the supply side of both rideshare and delivery, I want to talk to Ashwini about, you know, the consumer side of things. You know, with supply coming in, you know, with laws of economics, you know, pricing, you know, definitely there would be impact on the pricing dynamics. I'm curious, could you give us a little bit of overview of, you know, how autonomous rides are being priced at the moment? Is it always a premium in all markets in LA or SF?
Autonomous rides are at a premium now because there's only one player in the market, and that's Waymo, right? So what we're seeing is essentially that, and I want to get to the point that Daniel was making, because I think there's a lot of truth in it, that the prices could only go higher, but that's because you're dealing, it depends on the number of entrants, right? And what we're seeing overall is that from the research we've done, it's a 30 to 40% on average higher price across all three markets, LA, SF, and Phoenix. Atlanta's rolling out, and that seems to be, Atlanta and Austin appear to be priced at overall the same level because it's on the Uber platform when you call the ride. So they need to price it comparably to a driver. What we feel in terms of the way that things are positioned at the moment, and I think consumer preference is important to play into the idea that it's like what happens to the drivers overall. Consumers are preferring rides without drivers, and that's just like, that's what the research has shown out, right? Once a consumer gets in the car, 70% prefer it to be without a driver. There's a higher preference among women to put their children or elderly relatives in cars, even though women are slower to adopt getting in these vehicles. And right now, I mean, you're talking about San Francisco. It's one of the most expensive markets in the world. Incomes are higher, usage of technology is higher, and so the willingness to pay more exists in that market compared to others. So what's going to happen as we see this roll out? I think what we know now with Tesla rides, which we're working on pricing on that at the moment, Tesla rides are looking at, you know, they're being priced at like kind of like half to a quarter of the price of an Uber ride, but they also have drivers in the car. So it doesn't count. And then I realized I didn't introduce Obi properly, but for those of us who don't know you, one, there's a hat on almost every seat, so please take a hat. And we are a consumer rideshare app that basically allows you to be kayak for rideshare, right? So you can aggregate prices in one screen, you can link your accounts, and then you can understand what pricing and ETA and wait times are. We've incorporated Waymo in, we're gonna soon have Tesla in the app as well, and you'll be able to, you know, kind of deep link in and choose your rides. We are highly used in these markets where Waymo exists, and we have seen a level of preference among our own user base, despite the fact that everyone that uses our app is a highly price-conscious consumer. So overall, like, you know, you're seeing there's consumer preference is about enthusiasm for technology, but also enthusiasm for the experience the car is providing in and of itself.
Do you think there will be sort of a return to sort of like subsidized rides, you know, in the early days of rideshare? And I guess maybe that might come when there are more entrants in the market. Right now it's still a premium, as you said. But like in terms of different rides of different distances at the moment, is there price competition there at the moment?
The price per kilometer is still is quite high. Like I said, like the only way we're going to see the return of quote unquote subsidized rides is if we see Tesla really expanding into the market and really embracing, like, you know, kind of like lowering the price, and if whether Waymo wants to compete with that or not. I don't think Tesla's, like, I think they have a ways to go until they get the approval to be in a car, you know, to have passengers in the car without the drivers. So it's not a comparable solution when you think about the fact that Waymo's actively out in market and you can call a ride at any given time.
And from the rideshare or ride-hailing company's perspective, how important is like pricing transparency for them? I understand you also sort of work with the companies and provide that your data as a service for them as well.
We do have a B2B data product, and I don't think companies want to be transparent about the pricing, right? Like, why would you? But the reality is that consumers compare, they're well aware of it. It's actually like far more, pricing elasticity is much more dynamic outside the United States than it is in the United States because there are a lot more rideshare providers. And prices are regulated on some platforms and they're not on others. So I think it depends on where you are, but pricing is the most important thing. And what we've seen overall in the market, consumers are paying more for rideshare, whether Waymo was there or not, and they're taking more rides. So this market is expanding. As Ryan said, the TAM is growing, and I think that's going to happen. That would have happened whether we had AVs or not.
I wanted to dive a little bit into sort of, you know, for drivers and couriers who might be displaced or having to adapt their work, what are some of the jobs that you see being created at the moment or further out in the future?
Sure, I'll go. It's, I think that I mean, in the near term is there's many categories of work that these drivers can work between. I mean, even in just a platform like Uber, they have so many different types of deliveries that you can perform. So what we're starting to monitor and what we advise anybody to look at who's leveraging our data and insights is starting to keep a close eye on the multi-apping trends, because we can see how drivers are multi-apping across rideshare by category or by service or company as well. And so I think there's going to be, as the AV fleets become more prominent, until the TAM starts to really expand out a bit more, as you may start to see a higher level of multi-apping across categories from rideshare to delivery, while still they want to continue operating on rideshare because there's higher pay there generally. But I think longer term, I think people start to look at other types of, as you think about really why someone has decided to gravitate towards this type of work, is there's flexibility in it. There's autonomy. You can kind of choose when you work, how you work, et cetera. And so there's many other types of flexible work that is coming to market, that is in market. But that market is only just growing right now. We see that 1/3 of the U.S. Workforce participates in some sort of flexible work today. With AI and automation being on the rise, as we expect that to only increase over time. So we see more opportunities. One thing that I'll add that I do think is like an interesting other type of job that you could see coming to market actually came out of the last Curbivore event we were at in LA. I do forget the name of the company, but there's a company where they were able to plug into a vehicle and remote control it from a console that was actually in a different country. And they were giving demo rides at Curbivore. And so someone could actually, I remember sitting in the car and someone plugged in from overseas in Europe, I think in Poland or somewhere, and then they take over the car and they're driving it for me and the person who was sitting in the driver's seat. And it was like, we're talking to this person, they're just allowed to drive from another country in LA. And so I think that's an interesting one, because at that point you can be a rideshare, if technologies like that come to fruition in production, you could be a rideshare driver from there's some things to investigate here, who should be allowed to do this, but from another country. You could be in New York and be a rideshare driver in LA. But say like, all right, LA is like peak demand is kind of dwindling, so now we need you in Atlanta.
So you basically can drive for 24 hours a day.
You could drive, I mean, if you want to drive for 24 hours, you could do it. But it's almost like, yeah, you could just drive across the entire country at different points in time, different days of week, et cetera, the way that you wanted to, and be a remote rideshare driver, or virtual rideshare driver, working from home.
So as the sole government affairs person on here, I'll tell you there are regulations around that.
I thought you could just roll that out and it would just, okay.
And several states do have regulations around teleoperations and where people have to be physically located. So very important.
That's good. I think that's important.
So from our perspective and from the delivery side, we talk about the quality of jobs, right? Like you're talking about the ability to be a delivery driver, maybe in another market, and the opportunity to pick up those rides remotely. But one thing that's often overlooked when we talk about autonomous vehicles and personal delivery devices, which is the category we fall in, is the fact that these vehicles and these devices are operating themselves when they're on the sidewalk or when they're on the street, but at the end of the day, they go somewhere. They're going to depots, they get cleaned, they get serviced, they get maintained, their software gets updated, and those are jobs too. And these are jobs that are paying way above a minimum wage. These are jobs that are paying way above a living wage. And every one of the companies, because I used to work at an autonomous vehicle company before, have depots locally in the markets that they're operating in. These depots are literally physical space where these items are stored, whether it's the PDDs or the AVs. And as the fleet sizes grow, so do the depots, so do the employees, and so does the hierarchy of those employees. Coming in from a field response operator to a teleoperator to a field supervisor, there's plenty of opportunity to move up through there. And oftentimes the folks that are coming in as field response agents don't have a college education. So it's not necessarily a requirement.
Is that sort of like the jobs being created? Is that one of the benchmarks that governments all often look at when you talk to them when you want to launch in new markets?
It is. It is. We always get the question about just job displacement and the jobs that we're creating. So we love to talk about all of these additional W-2 jobs that come with benefits as opposed to the gig workers.
Yeah, I think from a fleet management point of view, it doesn't matter if you are AV or EV, you still need the same processes and the same people when in the site. And depending on the site, whether it's a regional site, an off-site, or a big site to do more than just regular maintenance. But you need that from a fleet management point of view, AV or EV. From a manned fleet point of view, one thing that we found is that there are two types of drivers. That standard gig driver, gig economic driver, which drives maybe 2 or 3 hours or part-time, flexible here and there, and the full-time driver. For fleets, we have found that the gig segmentation doesn't work because as they are used to working part-time whenever they want, that doesn't work for a fleet. So in a fleet, you have to have full-time employees that work all the time consistently, that show up every day for the job.
I wanted to broaden up, our discussion a little bit. What can sort of platforms do to sort of retain and maintain the trust among its drivers and sort of keep that balance between the existing fleets and also the all other types of autonomous partners? If anyone would like to, this is like an open question.
Well, I think it comes down to transparency in what the fees look like, what they're earning, what they can expect, the availability of the work to be. Most of the gig workers are in that economy because it's flexible, as Ryan was saying. So transparency around that and being able to depend on it. From our perspective, we don't have those workers. We have W-2 employees. Their schedules are planned out. They know what their hours are going to be. They know what they can anticipate, and they have jobs that they can rely on.
Yeah, I will say from our fleet point of view, it's all about the benefits and the consistency of pay. Knowing that they're going to a job, like this is not their number one job, that they are getting the benefits and that the culture is something that they like to go to. So some of the surveys that we have done with our workforce is, why do you like this job? And so we have improved based on those surveys, what type of benefits we provide to our employees, to the point that today what we hear from them is we love coming to work at our mobility because of the package that we have put together for them and how they're treated as people, not as numbers.
I mean, I would look at it from the consumer point of view. How many of you have been in a car and the driver asks you how much you paid for the ride? Like, come on. Like most of you, right? Just happened to me last week going to the airport because they don't trust the price that they're getting paid. They don't know what they're getting paid. They don't know what you're getting paid. They don't understand the spread between it. And I think that level of transparency, like, Empower, I don't know if anyone from that company is here, but it's super interesting, right? Because it's just like, I was first told about Empower 2 years ago by a driver who had picked me up in a curb from the airport. And he was like, you need to try this app instead. What do you do for work? He was chatting. I mean, the idea of a subscription-based model is something that is happening outside the United States at a very rapid rate. In India, for example, Uber has had to change its business model for tri-wheelers because you cannot, another company came in owned by Paytm, and they introduced a subscription model. And it sort of shifted the industry around it. So I think that new business models are coming out around this. I think it gives preference to full-time drivers, but we know the majority of rides happen with full-time drivers anyway. And as a passenger, I know I prefer being with someone who's a more professional driver than not. And that's a question of safety and many other things that are there. So I think that pricing transparency, that's where it really matters. as you think about breaking down the components of a ride?
I think just to add to that, I mean, there's, I think, a consistent theme across everyone here around transparency. And when we think about the lack, you mentioned around people, the driver asking, hey, what is the price right now? It's like, that is an interesting component, because a lot of times you do see, and we see in the data, that we see rides where there's a 15% take rate. We see rides where there's an 80% take rate from the platform. And so there's a wide spectrum of that, and you're not seeing an even distribution of going back to the driver on pay that exists there. But I do think that as you look at the innovative models, there's companies like, I think one that's been most interesting to me on a global scale is InDrive, that really has implemented at scale successfully and profitably a free marketplace model that is similar to the rest of the gig economy. As you look at an Airbnb is a host, you have a host who has a property, and they say, here's the price, and you decide whether to pay it or not. So they actually have that same type of model where you can actually, the ride will come in, the ride request, but they're saying, hey, the rider's like, I'm willing to pay within this band, and then you have a lot of drivers who just bid on it in real time, which sounds inefficient relative to what we're used to today, but through seeing it live, it actually works pretty instantaneously. So you have a free market model where the market decides what the price is rather than the platform itself.
But if we look in the US, like, we don't have a lot of different models, like the bidding model. Like, what kind of signals can drivers look at to sort of still get the best jobs, still get the higher paying jobs, or like close by jobs that they can optimize for?
Yeah, I mean, I think through the platforms themselves that they're working for today is they, one, have to be very cognizant and conscious to not over-recruit in the market as supply dynamics are changing over time. So hopefully as more and more supply is being introduced to the market, they're not maintaining the same level of acquisition initiatives that they have at play to bring more and more drivers in the market, and can kind of normalize things over time as the market supply dynamics evolve, or supply is increasing from autonomous vehicles. And as they're doing so, as those things would change, is like offering in their marketplaces, or being more open to offer opportunities that are out there for work, or create awareness, I would say, around those things. It's hard to see them probably doing that completely. So I think the best thing there is for looking for even anybody across the ecosystem, even the autonomous operators, is creating awareness around these new jobs that are being created directly through them, and trying to generate as much awareness as possible.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on the InDrive point?
Yeah.
That InDrive had to pull out of the US. And in doing so, it was because the bidding model wasn't quite working because of like base costs that had to be met. Those include insurance, competitive with other markets. Like, it was working well in Miami, didn't work so well in some other places. So, and we know that, like, right from talking to consumers and looking at pricing. So I think like these things can work in some places, but like there are a level of base costs that has to be met to be deployed market by market. And in the US, regulation state by state is so different that it really impacts rideshare companies' ability to perform, and also new entrants into the market that are not used to like kind of working on US prices. So InDrive often undercuts internationally, and it does have the bidding model to a degree, and goes head to head with companies like Bolt in particular in like Southern Africa. But like it's not, it hasn't been able to take off in markets that are more highly regulated. And I think that's because there are base costs that have to be met no matter what.
Yeah, because the minimum labor costs are there, so you cannot go under certain labor costs, plus what you said, insurance and everything else that goes with a costing model. So there's only a base, and that base is hard to break.
Daniel, I'm curious, as AVs have come into LA, which is your sort of main market, like what sort of communication or data sharing do you have with Uber or Waymo to sort of understand like how your drivers need to be dispatched?
At this time, we don't have any data sharing. However, I think that there will always be a hybrid model. right now it's too early for that hybrid model to be affected by one or the other, because the supply of AVs and EVs is not significant enough in the market to make a difference. I think as the market evolves, there will be segmentation as to what AV serves and EV serves. EV will probably require more of a premium type of product. It's probably going to be more a lot more touches like Wayve and the premium or airports where you need luggage and other stuff, versus the AV, which may serve a different type of population.
Yariel, I think one last point I'm curious to ask you about. I know Serve is planning to double its fleet to 2,000 by the end of the year. So with that new supply of robots coming in, like how do you see the company improving its utilization? Whether it's deploying in more cities, or like what would that sort of look like for you?
So deploying in more cities is part of the strategy. We haven't announced any additional cities, but some are on their way. Just like increasing the number of hours that we're operating in a market, because right now it's mostly at 12 hours from 10 to 10. So increasing it into some of the later night hours, increasing the service of the markets that we're operating in, meaning when we say Miami, it's not just the city of Miami. We're operating in Coral Gables, we're operating in Miami Beach. We might be operating in a couple of the other surrounding cities soon. So expanding that footprint to allow for the expanded fleet size, and then also making sure to work with our partner, working with Uber Eats to ensure that the filters that they've set up to send orders our way are working to the best of their abilities, so that the bots are at their highest utilization point, because really that's where we make the most money.
How do you mitigate like weather conditions like snow and things like that?
Common question. So the tires are all-terrain tires, but we do factor in a certain number of days for weather that they'll be out of service. An example, we just launched Chicago last week. Chicago is notoriously snowy in the winter. So we have, well over 20, 30, 40 days as part of the calendar that we can anticipate we won't be operating. In light snow, we will be operating. In light rain, even heavy rain, we'll be operating. But if it's unsafe for a human to be out there on the roads or on the sidewalk, we're not going to be out there on the road or the sidewalk either.
But snow is when people order the most.
No, and the question also, not only for your product, but also for autonomous. Living in Chicago, and I know how difficult it is just to drive. So I see a lot of obstacles for the AV vehicles in the northern cities or in snow cities.
I was recently I visited the depot of Waymo in SF and saw the new Seeker models, and I think they have like their own individual wipers on each of the sensors, so maybe that would help a little bit. But
It's a start.
yeah, it's a start. So that's all the time we have. So I put your hand together for our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Excited for the next talk. It's going to be about charging and depots, and we'll get that on screen in 1 second.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Are we charged up yet? We will be soon. Okay. First of all, I'm a big Curbivore fan. Now I'm a fan of this. This is pretty cool. Harry, Jonah, good job. Let's give it up for the Curbivores that have gone autonomous, the autonomous Curbivores. My name is Matt Doss. I'm the former longest-serving New York City Taxi and Limousine Commissioner. I left 15 years ago. I have a lot of hats that I wear. I'm a transportation lawyer, founder of the transportation practice at Wendell's Marks. We represent companies like you for consulting and all types of legal business, including getting permits from regulators, which is always a challenge dealing with regulators. I also run the ITR, the International Association of Transportation Regulators. We have our executive director, Kim Rankushin, here. And so we basically educate at our conferences the robotaxi regulators and other regulators of passenger ground transportation. I do a lot of other stuff too. But to my left is Ben. Ben Mandel is from L-Charge. He's the VP of Partnerships, formerly worked at the New York City Office of Sustainability. I remember that office when I was working for Mayor Bloomberg. Was founded by Rit Agrawala, who was a trailblazer for Plan YC. And then he worked at CalStart for many years. Now he's at L-Charge, and we're going to talk a little bit about a partnership. You heard from the COO of Tower Mobility. Here's the COO, Andres Muñoz, who formerly worked at a number of places, including many years at Pepsi, as well as at Lyft. And I'll frame the discussion first by talking a little bit about, time being money. For ride-hail drivers, fleets, car sharing, whoever's electrifying, it's not only a chicken and egg issue, building the infrastructure and planning it out, but time is money. So much so to the point that I was actually working with Professor Shaheen from CARB and the folks over at the PUC and in California on figuring out where do the ride-hail drivers go, because we want to build infrastructure based upon what they do and where they go. And I found that the NEVI funding put billions of dollars out there with really no game plan for states to figure out where they're going to put the charging infrastructure. And time is money for drivers. In the 90s, we put CNG on in the vehicles for taxis. We had to rescind the program because the lines were too long, all the utilities were using it, and at the end of the day, the drivers just can't wait, and that's the key thing here. If we want to get electrification before autonomy, we need to figure out where the drivers go and make sure that it's available. Then we transfer to autonomy and we go down that road. What about the grid? And we're here to talk a little bit about that. My good friend Sam Schwartz, Gridlock Sam, coined the term gridlock during the 1980s transit strike in New York City. But there's another type of gridlock for those in the EV infrastructure field, and it's called dealing with the utilities companies, and the chargers don't come fast enough, right? And we don't know where the stations are, and the grid is being taxed. So if we really want to have autonomous electric mobility, whether it's the Waymos of the world, the Teslas of the world, or bots, anything that's being charged, we need to place the chargers in the right place. And if we can't, what we're going to hear from today about this great partnership between these two companies as a concept is maybe bringing the chargers to you, right? So why don't we start with you, Andres, talk a little bit about a quick snapshot into the case for mobility and how fast is fast enough, and how's Tower working in this space?
So good afternoon, Andres Muñoz, CEO of Tower Mobility. We started this company about 4.5 years ago, providing services for ADA riders. About 1.5 years ago, we started with electric vehicles out of LA. And we quickly learned that the infrastructure that is out there is not really for fleets. Mm-hmm. The infrastructure that is out there is for private users that can go into a Tesla charger, charge for 20 minutes, and then go. But when you're looking at a fleet of 200, 300, 400 or more vehicles, you need actually a facility that has the power, it has parking space for the vehicles, it has parking space for the drivers, for the overhead. You need to have bathrooms to support 200-300 people, and none of those are set up. We quickly learned that what is out there is not for fleets. So we had to go in and start saying, okay, what do we do? Look for a facility that has power from the grid. And then when you find one, it's not that easy just because the permitting, dealing with utility companies takes a while. So the solution of having mobile charging, having charging come to you like L-Charge that comes to a lot, an empty lot, where you can bring in a trailer for your offices, where you have plenty of parking space, and you can just plug in the vehicles into these chargers, and these chargers are generating energy every day with gas, and there is a supply of gas that could be direct or through a service that comes in every single day. Really enables enable us to move into where we are today, of being able to have a location that puts out 170, 200 cars every single day without missing a beat, and not having to wait for 6 months or a year for permitting or for bringing energy into a location.
Ben, why don't we talk a little bit about what L-Charge does and also the partnership that you both put into place?
Yeah, happy to. So Ben Mandel, Vice President of Market Development at L-Charge, and we really specialize in intelligent off-grid fast charging solutions to help EV fleets grow and scale. Really proud of this case study we have with Tower. That's been a great deployment for us, hopefully for them as well, because basically what Andres is describing is the crux of our business and why we exist. It's site selection and where a business sets up, especially in a super competitive industry with thin margins. It shouldn't be a function of where is there adequate grid capacity, right? That's kind of the tail wagging the dog a little bit. It should be, where does it make sense for my business to be operated? Where is there enough real estate to enable other amenities to be constructed so that my drivers and employees can have a positive experience? And we can make the charging materialize at that site, right? That is advantageous for other reasons for your business operation. And so that's what we're doing. We're bringing mobile charging trailers or mobile-enabled charging trailers. We're getting them deployed and set up in under a month, and then for a period of maybe 6 months, maybe 18 or 24 months, while you're waiting for maybe a more permanent grid connection, or maybe you're comfortable with this solution as an indefinite option, not worrying about capital expense or demand charges, and having that cost and operational certainty that off-grid solutions can provide. This is really what's enabling businesses like Tower to grow and flourish and continue to expand into new markets without that gating constraint, that threshold condition of, gosh, I found a right site, but does it have enough grid power?
How does it, so far, are there any results from the work you're doing together in terms of cost savings, like average times for chargers that you could talk about? Like how has it impacted operations for your fleet?
It's all about the learning curve, but after quite some time of being together, we have learned to quickly fine-tune the operation. So obviously at the beginning, as we were partnering, like any marriage, you have to adjust to things, but now the reliability is amazing. The cost is good. The other thing about having a partnership like with L-Charge is you have a consistent price. It doesn't matter if it's 5 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the price is the same. So you have some consistency there on pricing that you can count on. It doesn't matter if it's in the summer or if it's in the winter, it's the same price, which in many cities, the price fluctuates between day and night, between January and the summer. So that consistency is good from a cost perspective. From a reliability perspective, it's really good. A vehicle that is parked, that is not going out there, is not generating revenue, for that is not good. So having somebody that is reliable, as good as L-Charge has been really good.
Well, reliability is the key, right? So maybe we could talk a little bit, Ben, about the experience of operating without the utilities off the grid. In terms of regulations, and has it been easier, or has it been more difficult and challenging to get your business up and running?
Our whole value proposition is time to power. So you need to get up and running now. You're a business. You rely on this for operational or revenue generating needs to operate EVs. We allow that to happen. I won't say we're permitting free, but we are permitting light because there is no grid connection. There's no physical penetration into concrete on the site, anything like that. We handle the permitting, most of the permitting requirements associated with a portable generator getting registered with the air board or the state. If we need to provide fuel storage and logistics, that needs to be documented as well. We take care of all of this when the site is already in operation, right? So we can parallel process a lot of this without it becoming a rate limiting step. Otherwise, it would be a rate limiting step of a couple of months, and that's still a vast improvement to a several year lead time if you're waiting on a grid connection in many larger scale sites. From a reliability perspective, this is how we retain customers, right? We're not going to do well. We're not going to even keep Tower as a customer, much less grow with them within their sites and across sites if we don't meet our SLA of 95% uptime. And our data this year alone suggests we're actually beating that and providing 98% uptime. Part of that is our internal kind of intelligent telematics system. It's sending our sort of central command center 250 data points every second so that we can diagnose and spot issues before they result in downtime, and we can remedy those issues, get technicians sent, send new cables as they may be needed. I understand from our operations team, we've actually gone through quite a number of Tesla adapters, right, at Tower sites, just because they are not necessarily all made for the level of usage that Tower's operators are providing for their vehicles. So I think the proof has been in the pudding so far in terms of 98% reliability, and the fact that at the LAX adjacent site, we've scaled from initially just a trailer or two to now 7 of our charging trailers and a total of 20 ports serving their operation and supporting hundreds of Teslas charging there daily.
Is this something that, I mean, what are the target customers? I mean, you know, AV fleets, EV fleets. I mean, how could it scale beyond, you know, using Teslas with your fleet? I mean, is this something that we could use with the bots? I mean, where's the beginning and the end of what we can charge and where?
It's limitless.
Beautiful. Now I'm really charged up.
But a less cheeky answer is there are many verticals that this could apply to. I know today's theme is really focusing on shared mobility. We do have an upcoming AV deployment that I'm really excited for more details to come out about later this year. But we've also launched a truck deployment for the first time here in Brooklyn with our partners at Manhattan Beer and Beverage Distributors at the foot of Atlantic Avenue. Yeah, I know those guys. So it's an amazingly exciting opportunity to support, in that case, even heavier goods movement, transit bus, school buses. These are verticals we're really exploring because the larger the format of vehicle, the larger the charging site, the more of an impedance that kind of time to power issue is becoming that we can address.
I guess despite the politics, I mean, we're still on a path with AVs for sure for electrification. I don't think there's a single company that said that they were not going to be fully electric, because they kind of need that, because the policymakers, I mean, our regulators, the top of mind thing, of course, everybody cares about safety, but their big issues in my world are wheelchair access, sustainability, labor workforce displacement. Those are the big issues. And this is something that it's almost like a no-brainer. No one's even talking about it, but it's still a challenge, right? Because the infrastructure is not there. You know, we may be going in a different direction as a country, but it's not changing what some states are doing. I always predicted that, you know, like blue states and cities are going to double down and put their own money on the line if the feds are pulling back on it. And that's already happening. It's been happening for years in California, where you're from. Yep. It's happening here. It's happening in a lot of different places. And what other lessons did you learn from this pilot so far? Is this out of pilot mode? It's like a done deal? And
no, it's completely out of pilot mode. We are now looking into what's next as we expand from our current fleet size to maybe 2.5 times over the next 6 to 9 months. So because of all the reasons that we have mentioned around, it's very hard to find facilities that have the power to be able to charge 200 vehicles. As a temporary, we need to rely on something that is mobile, like L-Charge. So we're already looking at a couple of facilities. Now, from a pilot perspective, I think we are at a point where we have optimized and we know exactly how things work. Obviously, there's always improvement. There's always on how do we use the data that is coming from the chargers into the vehicles, into battery management, into managing the energy. So that all the vehicles get out on time and with the right level of energy. So that's the piece that we're looking into right now. But I think 95% of what we needed to learn has been learned and has been implemented.
And are they fast chargers?
They're fast chargers, yes.
Okay, all of them, okay. Do you have level 2 compatibility also, or no?
Not on the units that we're deploying with Tower. That's kind of an all-in-one charging trailer with 180 kilowatt capability.
Got it. I have a feeling that the static, infrastructure that's put into place is going to be like the slow stuff, and you guys are going to be the fast charging folks that are moving around, which is pretty cool. Do we have any questions? No questions? No preguntas? Okay, yes.
Sounds better. Yeah, how much more expensive? Like cost per kilowatt basis, right?
To amortize it across kilowatt hours, not to give a squirrely answer, but it depends on utilization. We're really cognizant of what the public charging network offers, and we work to beat that wherever we can. One factor that I've become more attuned to since I've been with L-Charge is we tend to kind of look at the cost of permanent ground mount grid tied systems as table stakes. So if you're paying, call it $100K per level 3 charging station, are you amortizing that over the cost of the kilowatt hours dispensed as well, which is dictated largely by the grid? We're aiming for sub 50 cent per kilowatt hour, and with high utilization, we can get there. With systems that are tied to the natural gas supply of the adjacent facility, we can get even lower than that. But we are very aware that we're working with businesses that are highly cost sensitive and need us as an input to help them stay competitive. Because if we're eroding their ability to be profitable, even in that temporary power phase, then there's no business for us.
Time for one more question, maybe? Well, I have a question. Oh, there's one? Okay.
Hi, what's the kind of long-term sustainability angle, right? You're using CNG or whatever to fuel electric vehicles. What's sort of the long-term play here? And one of the big reasons we're doing EVs is sustainability.
Which one of us is that to? Me? So the nearer term approach is to explore forward compatibility with renewable fuels, renewable natural gas. We have an interesting partnership with a flare gas provider who basically sequesters off-gassing from oil and gas extraction facilities, liquefies it, and will actually transport that carbon negative commodity to a site for use. We're eager to explore partnerships with hydrogen blends, including new engines that can actually run on higher than probably 20% is what we can max out at currently, blended into the gas supply. We'd like to get that higher with new technologies that are coming in and integrate those as a standard offer on our trailer. Our general value prop, though, is along the lines of, for whatever reason, the grid is probably not an option for you if you're looking into off-grid solutions. And so while on a grams or GHG per mile basis, we may be a little more in most states, we encourage folks to pursue that long-term connection to the grid if that's available. And as soon as that's ready, part of the benefit of our kind of pay-as-you-go model is we'll tow our trailer away at that point, and you can go with a permanent grid-tied connection, and we'll deploy our equipment elsewhere. So it's directionally much better than keeping a fleet that's operating on gasoline or diesel otherwise, and it's still very competitive with the grid, both in terms of reliability and cost and emissions, even if it is kind of localizing those emissions for a period of time.
Outside of fleets, is there any chance that you might Uberize this, and if I get stuck on the side of the road and I ran out of charge, then instead of calling 3As, I can call you and you'll show up with your? Is that a possibility?
There are businesses that have dabbled with that is not an opportunity we've explored, but
okay, just trying to think outside the box here.
Yeah.
Well, hey, look, there's no gridlock here, EV gridlock here. These guys are moving people around. They're getting their stuff done cheaper, more effectively. Great partnership. Congratulations, gentlemen, and let's give them a big round of applause for sharing this innovative approach,
Thank you.
which could be the future for EVs. Thank you. I'll turn it back to the Curbivores, the autonomous Curbivores.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Andres. Great questions, great panel. One more panel for everyone before we can get to the drinks and networking, so hold your horses a little bit longer. But a really important conversation about safety. So that'll come up right now. Thank you.
All right. Thanks to the organizers. The last panel was great. We have everyone's names and titles up here, so rather than me try to butcher your names and titles, I'll just let that be the guiding post there, and I'll just jump right into it. We are in New York City. There are not currently any robo-taxis operating in New York City, as far as I know, last I checked. There was one briefly in Newlab. Does anyone remember that, when Newlab had the autonomy pilot here? I forget the name of the company that was doing that. Optimus, that's right, yes. But that was it. I'll start with Sarah as our regulator on the panel. When are we going to see robo-taxis here in New York?
Well, I am here as a member of the Board of Commissioners of the Taxi Limousine Commission. In my day job, I run a transportation research center at NYU, the Rudin Center for Transportation. So I think about this topic a lot, thinking about the frontier of technology. And I think it's fair to say I'm probably the most pro technology member of the Taxi Limousine Board of Commissioners. That being said, we rightly have quite a few steps to get through before we start taking Waymos around New York City. As you know, or as you may or may not know, Waymo is currently testing vehicles with human drivers here in New York City. There are 8 vehicles. That test is underway. The data is not in yet. So it remains to be seen what needs to happen. And then there are steps that need to be taken at the state legislature to approve these vehicles' operation in New York, and then at the city to license these vehicles to operate, and then the TLC would need to put into place various regulations for carrying around passengers. So there are a lot of steps, and just to put it in perspective, in New York, there are about 1 million rides a day happening in taxis and Ubers and Lyfts, et cetera. There is nothing in operation right now that comes anywhere close to the number of rides that happen here in New York. So when we talk about regulating for things like liability and insurance and licensing different vehicles and enforcement and interaction with first responders, we are talking about an entirely different scale and a pedestrian environment that is entirely unique to the United States. So while I have ridden in a Waymo and I loved it, it is going to take quite a few hurdles to operate here in New York.
It seems to me, from my observations in covering this industry for many years and listening to the way that people, especially elected officials, talk about autonomous vehicles, that there seems to be the message is getting lost sometimes. That you hear Waymo and you hear Zoox and others talk about how safety is a guiding principle, that's the thing that's going to unlock this technology and increase safety in our cities. But when you listen to the elected officials, what they're talking about, and they're responding to constituents and interest groups, they talk mostly about jobs. And I think we saw this recently in Boston when there was a conversation around this. We've seen it here in New York as well. I'm wondering sort of how do we bridge the gap here, right? That there seems to be, we have two sides that seem to be talking past each other. And maybe, Zach, you want to take this one? How do we sort of bridge the gap and start talking about the same thing, or to make sure that at least the message is getting across?
Yeah, well, I think two things get conflated when we talk past each other with regard to safety and jobs. And I think it starts with understanding at what scale AVs can actually penetrate environments where there are enough vehicles on the road to actually impact what those jobs look like. So when you talk about areas where I think Ryan said before that driver pay was being reduced in LA specifically, there are reasons that AVs go into a specific market. They pick a specific geo-hash to penetrate in because they can create the most utilization at that given moment. So I think the first question, of course, is how do you create the safety in order to get there? But then I think, we have a responsibility to figure out that in order to inform that safety, what are the things that need to happen down the value chain? Because that's where a lot of the jobs are going to be fulfilled. So I'm in the camp of AVs will at some point be democratized, which long-term will have impact on jobs. And I think the only way to satisfy operations of AVs, we talked about depoting and charging and all of the things that are going to be required for maintenance and cleaning. That is where the gap needs to be bridged, because it's very easy to say AVs are going to take over everything, but actually understanding the full suite of what's required to operate an AV, I think starts to bridge the conversation on how you get from take away all jobs to there actually are a lot of jobs required to make this network run.
What kind of data is important in this conversation in terms of what the regulators or what cities should be asking for, what the companies might be willing to give up, what they might not be willing to give up? Where do you see that conversation going? Aparna, do you want to start with that?
Hear me? Yes, there we go. Thanks for the question, and excited to be here and see all of you. And I guess I bring some background from both a couple of roles in federal government, working at Zoox on the policy team a couple of years ago, and now at VIA, which is really now, I know many of you know us as the ride-hail company that did shared rides back in the day, especially for the New Yorkers here. But really more recently, we've been focused on public transit and really how do we modernize public transit. So I guess I take it a little bit from that lens and thinking about using some of the data to figure out how people are moving around and what challenges they have. You know, where are people going? What's the puzzle of how they get around successfully and not successfully? So I think data can really inform that and think about where AVs can fill those gaps. It could be that, as we do in New York City in many areas, we have great public transit, but there are some transit deserts where there is no way to move around. There could be areas where we can complement first and last mile service. So I think from the first and foremost thing I think about is how do we look at data of how people move around, and then we can think about, you know, the safety and infrastructure of how people are moving around and what's working and not working, just to get us started.
I'd love to add to this too, because I think there's also, we talk a lot about in the development of AVs around this notion of how do you get to full autonomy, and you talk about the use of synthetic data to get there. And one of the things that Nexar does is we specialize in collecting real world, real-time data at scale. And the reason for that is because the world is just very messy. You stick a bunch of AVs on the road, you expect implicitly that they know where construction zones are, they know where potholes are, they know where emergency vehicles are, they know where all of these types of situations are going to encounter the way that the vehicle responds and reacts. And there is a whole category of that is required in order to sustain operations in a way that complies with the level of safety that you expect. So I think there's definitely a component of how you think about data in order to enter the right market and how you serve the consumer. There's another aspect of it is, don't forget there are going to be other humans on the road while AVs are driving, and how you make sure that it can truly understand the environment around you that is consistently changing all the time.
Jeremy, how do you think about this question around safety data, about what's important, what's valid, what's proprietary, and what should be required in order to have access to a place like New York City with millions of customers, potentially billions in revenue?
Yeah, well, Zach owns all the data. Is the answer. It all goes to Nexar. But no, I think it goes beyond data. So we are one of the largest TLC rental fleets working with human drivers. In New York, there's plenty of other fleet owners and operators here. Beyond just who owns the data, how do we use the data, I think there's a much larger conversation. It really is a conversation from all parties in the industry for us to prepare for autonomous vehicles. And you know, before we can get there, we have to make sure that the current industry is healthy and safe. And I think, you know, the TLC, I speak at pretty much every commission meeting. I'm appreciative of everything that Commissioner Doe has done to increase driver pay and in some ways make the industry stronger. But I also think there's been a few whiplash decisions, regulations that are passed, whether it's about insurance, right, that is increasing costs for responsible fleets and letting others off the hook. There's driver pay regulation. We had, you know, 2024 was a horrible year for rideshare drivers in New York. 23 was great. 25 is coming back. But for me, it all ties back to regulatory decisions. I'm not blaming you, Sarah. But I think
This is
that's
a safe place.
But I think that's critical. Before we talk about what insurance and what kind of plates, whether it's diamonds or medallions or how we're going to regulate AVs, we have to make sure that we all fully understand the impacts of today's decisions and the industry, specifically with insurance and with safety, because insurance is always going to be an issue, but we have to get it under control for the human drivers before we think about it with the AVs. And I'll tell you, if all we do is focus on how it's going to work for AVs 5, 10, 15 years from now, and it deteriorates for the human drivers, it's also going to pit human drivers even more against AVs. And I think what we need is to create the opportunities for these two sides of the industries to work together.
The situation that you're describing, I think it really gets at the crux of the issue, because I feel like from the regulatory standpoint, everyone has a memory of what happened when Uber first showed up, over 10 years ago. We saw a rapid devaluation of taxi medallions, the impact that had on the driver population. We're about to have a new mayor pretty soon, and it seems like it could go in either direction, but it seems like at least Zoran Mamdani, who's the front runner, has a lot of sympathy with the driver population, as he's done in the past. I don't know where he stands on robotaxis and AVs, but it does seem in some degree that we might have an administration that is not entirely sympathetic to the technology companies and maybe more sympathetic to the drivers. I don't see that necessarily as a bad thing. I think that this needs to be a conversation. But Sarah, where do you think things will go politically after the election? And what do you think people need to keep top of mind as the companies, especially, Waymo has already spent millions of dollars to lobby and to try to get entry into New York City. I assume others will follow as well. What do you hope that regulators and the next administration keeps in mind when it comes to this technology?
That's a great question, and I'm curious to see, as you mentioned, how the next administration will address this topic. There are about 180,000 licensed TLC drivers in New York City. That's a huge number. That's like almost the size of Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh's worth of TLC licensed drivers. And so if you're going to talk about automating out that many folks, we're going to have a real crisis on our hands. Instead, it behooves the next administration to think ahead. If we are going to introduce automation, what is the role of the person who was driving? Will it be to secure wheelchairs in wheelchair-accessible vehicles, none of which exist right now in AVs that we've been looking at, or that I've been looking at, not TLC specifically. And will the operator be there as a kind of fail-safe system for any AV challenges, especially, say, a jaywalker comes across and the AV system doesn't see the person? I think that there is a lot of space for workforce development in New York City, especially in building up the maintenance and operation of these vehicles and the kind of ensuring that they remain charged and in good condition to operate on New York City streets, which can be challenging, of course. And so I think that first step the new administration should do is start building up a workforce development program so that not only can we build up our EV management workforce, which is currently also lacking, but then also to build up the kind of coding and mechanic skills that will be specific for autonomous vehicles.
Aparna, I wanted to ask you, from VIA's perspective, you guys have a partnership with Waymo. You are working with them to link together robotaxis and transit networks. Yep. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you see that maybe applying to different markets, different cities, and what you see as the future in terms of the relationship between autonomy and public transportation, especially in a place like New York, which has such an outsized transit situation compared to like other markets, right? So it's a different situation here, but how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really excited a couple of weeks ago at VIA to announce our new strategic partnership with Waymo. So what this means, as you guys know, and I kind of alluded to before, VIA has been working with transit agencies, cities, all types of public entities around the US and around the world to try and figure out for their entire transit networks, how do we really make them more optimized, efficient? In some places, we've worked to really add in microtransit, on-demand microtransit to the transit network. We've looked at, what makes the most efficient network. So, the next step is really thinking about mixed fleets, including autonomous vehicles in transit, making sure they're a part of that transit landscape. So giving, some folks, the first time they get in an AV may be in a transit context, right? It may be a low-speed shuttle. It may be in another type of vehicle. But a lot of folks who are maybe more frequent users of transit might take their first ride in an AV, which is important for educational purposes and really building that trust. So our partnership with Waymo is really focused on plugging their AVs into existing places where VIA is working. And we're beginning that partnership in Chandler, Arizona, where VIA operates a microtransit service called Chandler Flex in collaboration with the city. It's basically an on-demand rideshare service with a fleet of minivans that helps people get to work, to educational opportunities, healthcare, grocery stores. It's been running for about 3 years and is fairly popular in the city. And obviously Waymo is also operating there. So at some times of the day, we have significant demand, and we will push some of our rides when we are a little bit oversubscribed on the Flex service to Waymo AVs. So that's how our partnership will work, and the passenger will get the opportunity to say yes to that and will be directed to a Waymo vehicle. And we're gonna use Chandler as a test case to figure out, how does this work? How does it work well? What doesn't work? How do we iterate on this? And then kind of decide where we're going, other cities, other places where this could be applicable. But what we think is important overall, and we've had some other partnerships in the past. We've done some pilots with AVs in Arlington, Texas, where we have a citywide microtransit service. We're currently doing a pilot in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, which is pretty rural and has a lot of crazy weather experiences. But what we're really trying to figure out is, how do we integrate AVs into transit networks and make them the most useful? And we have a lot of data to study there too, right? As time progresses and as we start to phase in these partnerships with different, and we are pretty agnostic in terms of AV developers. We can work with any of them, all of them. We hope to have more partnerships in the coming months and years. So we can really integrate into wherever VIA is working with a transit agency or a city. And so what's important to us really is that these rides are shared long-term, because that is crucial for public transit. Otherwise, we're just adding more single passenger vehicles to already pretty congested city roads, especially in a city like New York. So we want these rides to be shared. We want to make sure that accessibility is at the core of development of some of these autonomous vehicles, because we really want to get folks who need to get from point A to point B, people who are disabled, who might need a little bit more assistance into these AVs as well. And so we want to make sure that we're encouraging AV developers to think about that from the onset. And so as for a city like New York, great mass transit, as I mentioned earlier. But one thing to think about is, there are areas where there is less transit access. There are transit deserts. There's areas where microtransit or an AV shuttle could complement existing transit, getting people to and from a bus or a train station. I think Sarah had an op-ed earlier this year where she mentioned overnight service, where AVs or microtransit could be helpful. So there's a lot of areas where, AVs or an on-demand model could really plug in and be beneficial.
I think the goal of having shared rides is commendable. The question is whether customers want to have the shared rides. We've seen in the past that they tend to not want to share the car with somebody, and we've already heard previous to the panel talking about how customers really enjoy having that car to themselves. That's one of the things that they enjoy about robo-taxi rides. And Zach, I wanted to ask you about, you guys are working with Lyft on their robo-taxi project, which also has involved May Mobility, I believe, and Mobileye. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys make dash cams in addition to sort of like a number of other things? How do you see sort of like the rollout for that particular project occurring? What's going to be next for there?
Sure. So we do have an AI-powered dash cam that we use to provide to rideshare drivers and fleets. Jeremy at VGM is a big partner, and the way that we look at the business is it's a community of providing insights not only for your own personal safety, but also to make the city safer. So we can understand where potholes are, where stop signs are down, et cetera, and all of that is used to effectively also train autonomous vehicles, so everything is kind of an ecosystem of safety. For Lyft specifically, there's a few areas in the rideshare industry where there is a lot of value here. One is for the protection and full understanding of a ride for a rideshare driver. If a rideshare driver receives a complaint, it's on average, it takes them 60 to 75 days to get back on the platform, irrespective of what happened, only because there is an investigation into what happened. Having a dash cam, you can immediately adjudicate that. You have a ton of savings and preserved, capital that you otherwise would have lost if you were off the platform. So we try and provide very unique value to the end user, which is either in the rideshare driver or the fleet provider. Now, the other side is how Lyft thinks about the future rollout of their AV platform, which, as everyone probably knows, is grounded in helping demand aggregation and fleet management services. Where we come into play, and I mentioned it before, is helping understand the road infrastructure around you and how you need to adapt your maps in order to ensure vehicles on the platform are continuously safe or have the ability to ongoingly train in areas where they may have not passed the test or they may have not seen that scenario where the little girl rolls the ball across the street and you don't know what to do. So we look at it as multifaceted partnerships where we can provide value today to the driver, and we can also provide value long-term to ensure the safety on the AV network.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
One more point on shared rides. I think it's important to think about this from the transit versus non-transit context, because what we have seen across the country is people will take shared rides in the transit context. A lot of our microtransit services, they're on demand in the same way that Uber and Lyft and TNCs are, but you are sharing a ride with other passengers, but it's a transit trip. It is similar to being on a bus, but you're in a smaller minivan or minibus type vehicle, and you expect to get on with somebody, but your fare is lower. It's, you're thinking about it in a different way. So I think in the transit context, like, folks will be more willing to take shared rides. When you're paying, a higher price, you want your own vehicle, you want the private ride, you want the privacy. That's a little bit different than some of the riders who are riding transit who may be just trying to get to a shift job or somewhere else like a grocery store or a healthcare appointment.
Jeremy, I wanted to ask you about the question around fleet management and safety and liability. What do you think robo-taxi companies need to keep in mind as they start to gain greater penetration into cities, as they start to increase the number of vehicles that are on the road and increase the number of customers that they're taking on? Are you seeing enough evidence that like these companies are taking these issues seriously around insurance, around liability? Obviously, not all companies are created equal. We have your Waymos who are actively publishing safety data on their website and taking part in peer-reviewed studies and using insurance data in order to show how much safer their technology is. And then you have other companies that are a bit more of a black box. And I'm just wondering how you think cities should approach that question when thinking about these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll leave it to the regulators to make the final decision and what data we look at and how we figure it out. But what I'll say, and bring it specifically back to New York, I don't know that I can answer the difference between Waymo and Zoox and all the different companies and if they're taking safety seriously. I think they are, because the truth is there are accidents every day, every minute with Uber drivers or regular drivers here in New York, and it doesn't necessarily make the news. The moment a Waymo or a Zoox car hits the curb, it's going to make the news. So I think they're much more sensitive to it, and they are focusing on it. What I will say though is New York is a different animal. It is in the regular fleets, in rideshare fleets, compared to anywhere else in the country and anywhere else in the world. And so I hope that they will continue to work with and learn from fleets of all sizes, but that management of the fleet, yes, you're getting rid of the driver. There is a different interaction that's needed, but the knowledge, what it takes to learn over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the New Yorkers who do this, who know what they're doing, I hope that is fully used and that it's created in partnership. I think that 10 or 15 years from now, or I'll also, I think, quote you, I think it was you, you said something like, we're not going to have Waymos tomorrow, but we can't bury our head in the sand and pretend like it's not coming. This is New York. This is Uber, Lyft, every other company's most profitable market, because they're not covering the insurance and we have to. But either way, it's the most profitable market. It is going to come here. But I think that 10 or 15 years from now, what we're going to see is some robo-taxis and full-time rideshare drivers. And that's more of our client and other fleets. TLC drivers who rent vehicles are more likely to be the full-time ones. They have to cover the costs. And those are the drivers that are going to make up the industry, complementing robo-taxis. The 2 or 3 hour, 4 hour, 5 hour, I have a car with a TLC plate from 2014, so let me just do, that's going to fall to the wayside because it's just not going to work. So I see a future where we're incentivizing these full-time drivers who have put a lot of time and money and they have a TLC license. Let's work with them. So again, Zach referenced this, but we have Nexar cameras in our vehicles. We have a few hundred right now operating on the streets so that we're learning, they're learning, everybody's learning. I thought it was going to be impossible because we own these cameras, or they own them, we're paying for them. There are cameras, but a driver is renting the car and we're requiring them to have it on 24/7 or however many hours the car is on. Not just when they're on Uber, when they're going to the grocery store, when they're dropping their kid off at school, because our insurance covers every minute they're in the car. And so we have actually almost no pushback. Every car with a camera is rented. We're paying the fee. What do they get out of it? Exactly what you said. Deactivation is actually the biggest thing. Somebody is drunk in the back seat, they make a complaint, he said, she said, nope, they have a camera, they're back online tomorrow. They have a camera through us, we're the one who actually have the footage. They have access to it, but we're the ones who own it. And they're the ones getting the data. And so this is a way that, no, I don't think every driver is saying, oh, let me help the AV future. But I think we should have more opportunities like that where these full-time drivers can be incentivized financially to help build the future, whatever it looks like, whether it's the insurance fraud, making better insurance policies, data for AVs. Let's get the people who are going to be there in the future involved.
I'm glad you brought up the camera situation because it does seem like that is a potential, it's obviously crucial for the tech stack, but it's also a potential liability for the companies, as we saw recently with these protests that were going on in Los Angeles. A number of Waymo vehicles were torched. Who knows why exactly the vehicles were burnt, but I think the assessment after the fact was a lot of people assumed that that residents in LA are skeptical of the Waymo vehicles because they're covered in cameras and the companies have been known to share data with cops. And there's concerns about, obviously, partnerships between, there needs to be partnerships between the robotaxi companies and first responders, obviously, but you have also political considerations around people's immigration status and the federal government situation. Sarah, I'm wondering, obviously this question's for you, you couldn't avoid it. How do you think that needs to evolve in a place like New York, where you have a lot of Democratic voters, people who see the robotaxi companies and maybe big tech overall as having been politicized over the past year, and how do you think the companies can navigate that sort of gauntlet?
Yeah, well, this is one of my favorite topics, so I could go on all evening, but I'll shorten this by saying that the TLC has dealt with this data question before. TLC used to during the kind of push for open data in the early 2010s, TLC published every kind of yellow taxi ride, which then the paparazzi used to track down famous people because they could see the medallion, they could see the taxi numbers, and then track down where Jennifer Lopez was or Sarah Jessica Parker at any given moment. And so that was an exciting time. But now data sharing for trips is still valuable, and it's still valuable to the public for analysis and transparency. But snapping it to the nearest intersection is a more protective measure. So we have dealt with masking data in the past, and yes, we need to continue to monitor who has access to data. We need to regulate how long the data is retained, who has access to the archives, who can hold on to a copy or just gets the kind of raw data that, say, there was an incident that occurred and just keep that clip. But I did want to get back to the data point and your question about the next administration, and I think that one thing the next administration would be smart to do is to really set up a data sharing within government system where the government could require that robotaxis or perhaps other systems that are accruing data on where potholes are, where a street fair is, et cetera, and that data is being shared vehicle to vehicle, but it should also be shared vehicle to government so that government knows if there's a construction lane being taken up by construction for longer than the permit allows, or if there's a pothole that's really causing damage to vehicles, and can be interacted with other data like MTA data so that if the 6 train breaks down at 28th Street, the system can kind of ping the taxi fleet or a for-hire vehicle fleet to say, come to 28th Street and pick up a bunch of passengers. You know, there is an event happening. It seems like that shouldn't be so difficult, but we don't have the systems in place for that interaction. So that's something I would like to see in the near future.
Zach, do you want to weigh in on that? You guys deal with this question.
Yep.
Cybersecurity. How much of this is an important issue, do you think, going forward?
Very important. So big +1. I think that there are serious economies of scale when you think about the future of smart cities for cross-collaboration between agencies and how you use those to close loops for things like street maintenance and stuff like that and crime response and all of those types of things. I think at the core of it, trust is most important. Like the way that we gain our users' trust is by letting them tell us if they're okay with us using, you know, PII compliant data that will not identify who they are or any of their private information for the purposes of supporting the community. Some of those things might be to improve road infrastructure. Some of those things might be to improve the future of how AVs operate on the road, which, by the way, is still important because safety is important to the community. So I think developing the consumer trust is pretty much all that matters if we want any of this to work, and data compliance is at the core of all of that.
And just to emphasize that point, part of what we did when we launched in our fleet with Nexar is specifically make sure, and they did a great job with their engineers and ours building it, that even though, like normally when you get a dash cam, it's one-to-one, right? The dash cam company and the person who's paying the monthly bill. But we made sure that there's a way for our drivers to log in and access their data and download a clip that they want. But it also directly links with our contracts, right? You're in a Toyota Camry today, it gets an accident, you're in a different one. And for that customer, they have access to just their footage based on their contracts. We were able to build that together. But that was critical. We were not going to launch this if we couldn't do that, because we needed to give our drivers the confidence and, you know, to work with us and to make sure that they knew that this would be a tool that would help them, right? It's not just us watching them all day.
Yeah, and I would follow up and say that I think one of the limitations of technological advances specifically in smart city has been because the only way that we were able to capture this type of data at scale is through crowdsourcing. And when you run that up against the, call it, lack of trust with big tech, you are in a very contrarian situation where you can't really advance smart city and safety unless you are providing data, and you can't even do that unless you trust the company you're providing it to. So I think in order for us to actually make material shifts in how we think about collaboration and management and the ability to capture that data at scale, it really is about trust.
I thought the NYPD is watching us in every traffic light anyways, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, I mean, public trust is certainly a core issue here. I think also that equity is a big topic that has become somewhat politicized, obviously, in recent months. But in a place like New York, I think it could be really easy for a robotaxi company to come in and service the rich neighborhoods, right? And leave the transit deserts to be deserts. And I'm wondering, should there be deals worked out between the cities and the companies to make sure that these companies are also servicing, deep Brooklyn, deep Queens, and the Bronx, as well as the rich parts of Manhattan? And how do you do that in a way that ensures compliance? So, Aparna, do you have a suggestion there? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way is to really think about like how to integrate, as I mentioned before, like into the transit partnerships, right? That's how we can get AVs to some of these underserved neighborhoods. So maybe working with MTA and others to figure out like where are these locations, and working with those AV providers to make sure there is these partnerships built, because you're right, that is like definitely a concern I've heard over the last 10 years of working, in the industry, is really a concern that AVs will become something for the haves and not the have-nots, and that's, adding on to that, my comment on accessibility earlier is that these may be not designed for people who have any type of disability or maybe in a wheelchair. So definitely very important topic to think about, but I think it comes down to partnerships between policymakers and AV companies.
And I would add the TNCs, right? The Ubers and the Lyfts and the Vias, but you guys don't do rideshare anymore. But because, especially in New York and Boston, and I think we'll be seeing it in other major cities, there's regulation about driver pay, right? And there's a algorithm about a driver's time online. Now, driver pay is not going to impact robotaxis. It's a little bit different. I actually think robotaxis could serve a huge purpose in the outer boroughs, where I'm a skeptic. I don't think a robotaxi is ever going to be able to take someone from Times Square. It's just never going to move. New Yorkers are not going to let it go through. In the more suburban parts of Brooklyn and Queens and Staten Island and the Bronx, where Uber drivers tend not to go because the rides are longer, the wait time might be longer, there's huge potential for a company like Uber or Lyft or any other base to be able to build the algorithm and actually force the robotaxis there. Remember, all drivers in New York are 1099. They're not employees, so you can't control the supply as much. With a robotaxi, I assume they'll be able to control the supply. There's no question, are they employees? So they could actually be serving those outer boroughs while the human drivers are serving the more congested, which also tend to be the more higher paying areas.
And I would add that there's a real opportunity to look at the job anchors in the outer boroughs, which are the airports, the hospitals, package sorting facilities, cargo intake facilities near the airports. There are tens of thousands of jobs, and they are often not easily accessible by public transit. And so rather than employing fixed route buses 24/7, that may or may not be the most efficient choice for a given place, for these job anchors in the outer boroughs, there could be a real opportunity to offer shuttle services to these locations from neighborhoods where their employees are concentrated.
Yeah, I would just say that, a lot of this at this moment is theory because we don't know how the market will play out. But I think the coolest part about this narrative is you now have switched the discussion from can both coexist to it's possible to actually improve driver pay in highly dense areas because of increasing utilization, while you have AVs service the outer routes that either nobody cares about or are just a pain to deal with. So at the end of the day, the ability to optimize earnings, whether you're an AV or a human driver, is to make sure that you are as close to 100% utilized as possible. And if you can create more dense areas in a city by way of not having to service outer parts, you will implicitly rise driver pay. Now, the question of supply is a completely different one, but I do think there are good parts about the complement of AV if done right.
I completely agree with that. Just to be clear, though, for New York, that will mean having fewer human drivers than we have today. right? The number does have to go down, however we look at it, but you have a certain amount of license plates and unlimited amount of drivers. And so I absolutely think there could be a perfect industry in the future that has both, but it's going to take some really smart and careful regulation to get those numbers right, that Sarah's going to push us through and easily.
I was going to say a lot of these vehicles are likely to have operators regardless of whether they're doing the driving or just managing the flow of passengers.
It's going to be a wild transition. I hope that you all will be there to see it through because you guys are all really smart. And I appreciate you guys being up here, and I appreciate everyone up here to listening to us. So thank you so much. And thanks to the organizers. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.